Now this is a story all about how this guy ended up losing 70 million because of political correctness. I have an interesting morale to offer you today, which is that political correctness can be really expensive if you don't know how to tame it. So let's start from the top. A big Swedish newspaper called Metro was bought up by an old white capitalist named Mats Kviberg. Shortly after, he did an interview with the alternative media Nyheter Idag, which is pretty much the most decent alt media in Sweden. They do dwell on topics such as immigration issues, but they also keep it clean and serious at the same time. They're also one of few outlets signed to the press ethical system, meaning that they can't publish any type of garbage without consequences. But many consider it to be a right-wing nationalist hate site, since the guy who runs the site was involved in the Sweden Democrats many years ago. He isn't anymore, he's just a libertarian now, but that's how many people view the site, as a typical racist nationalist rag. So they interviewed Kviberg, and during the interview he took a huge dump on political correctness and said that he's sick of Stalinistic journalists in the mainstream media looking down on ordinary people and their concerns. He complained about their style of virtue-signaling journalism, which caused quite a bit of controversy in the Swedish media, ironically proving his point. One of the biggest TV stations in Sweden, TV4, broke off their business deal with Metro, 3 of their columnists quit, and there was even talk from parts of the government about cancelling Metro's cooperation with the Stockholm subway, since usually their paper is handed out in the trains for free. What's kind of interesting is that all of this happened before Kviberg even had a chance to fulfill his vision and change the way Metro works. He said that he wanted to go from the politically correct newspaper that Metro is to a more edgy and honest alternative that caters to truth and ordinary working people and their concerns. But he didn't even have time to do that before this massive boycott. So he panicked and apologized on Twitter, which was absolutely pathetic because the guy outright lied. He said that he had no idea what kind of magazine Nyheter Idag is, and he truly regrets his interview with this far-right Nazi website. Despite the fact that in the very interview, the magazine's connections to the Nationalist Party, the Sweden Democrats, were addressed. Kviberg's business partner was there for the interview too, and he compliments Nyheter Idag on being good at directing traffic, and says that, and I quote, "Even though you've done some stuff connected to the Sweden Democrats, you're still good with traffic." End of quote. So there's just no way that they were unfamiliar with what kind of newspaper that was interviewing them and what type of audience that they're getting their traffic from. And what's even more pathetic is that Kviberg completely cucked out and decided to sell his shares in Metro for 1 Swedish krona, meaning that altogether he made a loss of 70 million Swedish crowns, which translates to approximately $8.3 million. This is mind-blowing. Here's the thing. When the media attacks you, you gotta realize that you're dealing with bullies. You're not dealing with virtuous crusaders of truth and enlightenment. You're dealing with sleazy fucks that will write just about anything to try and ruin your life, because they view you as a threat towards their income and worldview and influence. So what you don't do, what you never do, is give them what they want, because they feed off of weakness. They want you to feel ashamed and conform. So if you give them that, you've lost. If you don't, they disappear, and people will look up to you as a person who took a stance for something they believe in. It might not feel like it in the moment, but in the long run people will see that the journalists are pathetic. If you stand your ground, the media loses credibility. But if you don't stand your ground, you lose credibility. And that's exactly what happened here. Now let's compare this case to a different case where our public service state media ran a hate campaign against an entrepreneur because he criticized communism and feminism. He sent out an internal email to his employees making fun of these retarded ideologies. It was very tongue-in-cheek, but it still became big news. They tried to make him feel ashamed of his actions. So what did he do? Well, he replied by offering them a trip to North Korea because apparently that's where politically correct left-wing fascists like them belong. He also said that whether or not they accept this field trip he's offering them, they can go fuck themselves. So that became an article too, but after this they didn't write another word about him. They gave up immediately because they noticed that this isn't a fight they're gonna be able to win, because he has no shame for the person he is. They can't bully him into submission, because shame is for subhumans. And journalists are the slimiest scumbags you're gonna find. They hide behind their pen and paper in their big office with their enormous budget and think that they can play God with people's lives at personal whim. And if you let them, they will. Now, when I posted about this on Facebook, I got several comments saying that they're gonna go shop at Dollar Store now, because they really like the stance that this guy took. They love how he stood up for something that they themselves can relate to, because essentially he's standing up for ordinary people, since people are really sick of political correctness by this point. I'm sure that he lost some customers, but he gained others, including people who didn't even know about this store before all this controversy. So in the end, it balances itself out. So Dollar Store's CEO became a role model for people, whereas Metro's former owner is just a withered away cuck. And what really bothers me here is that the guy is fucking rich. He could have easily afforded a fight with the media machine while also doing something good for society as a whole, but he chose not to. How the fuck can you be rich and care about what the media thinks? Metro could have been a really interesting twilight between mainstream media and alternative media, a balanced center. But instead, they just dropped the ball. And who gives a shit if some of your old columnists quit? You really think that assholes with an opinion are hard to find? There's no shortage of that. Journalists and columnists are the very definition of expendable. And sure, losing business deals sucks. But instead of just cucking away, he could have fought back. He could have turned the tables on this situation and made it into a big deal and turned it into a public debate. And made a much needed point of how the establishment in Sweden really does go out of their way to curtail freedom of speech. I mean, just look at what happened here. He made one comment about Stalinistic journalists, and all of a sudden, they're calling for Metro's cooperation with the subway to be revoked. They don't want Metro to be handed out to people anymore because the owner doesn't like communism. I mean, what does that say about the establishment? If they're really not Stalinists, then why would they want to destroy his newspaper because he says they are? He could have made an excellent point out of them while also getting free PR like Donald Trump, who managed to do it pretty well, don't you think? And if some politicians want to try and fuck up your deal with the subway handing out your paper and keep people from reading your paper, which is essentially a form of censorship, then why not ask people to subscribe instead and think of it as a donation to freedom of speech? I mean, that's as good a reason as any to give money to. When it comes to selling a product, it's not just about the product. It's also about the type of values that are associated to the product and the type of lifestyle that it's promoting. That's why Coca-Cola commercials shows happy people doing exciting things and exercising and healthy stuff like that, because subconsciously it creates positive, attractive associations in the mind. There's actually a great documentary on this called No Logo, based on a book by Naomi Klein. For those who want to know more about how this works, I really recommend this watch. But my point is this. There's so many other ways you could have done some marketing strategy on this shit and turned it around to suit your agenda and turned it to your advantage. But you didn't because you got scared. Put simply, had you stuck with it and doubled down and turned it around to suit your agenda, you could have cut your losses to a couple of millions instead of 70 million. With integrity and patience, you could have profited off of the culture war, but instead you caved in like a pussy, and now your magazine is gonna die in the long run, because that's what happens to all big media. They're losing both credibility, the public's trust, and their money. Nobody wants to pay for subpar virtue-signaling journalism. The long-term trend isn't speaking to the media's favor. It is speaking to the alternative media's favor. But this also says something about how Sweden works. I mean, just look at how insane this is. The guy got interviewed by a legitimate news site. They write facts and not lies. But because of some super distant connection to something once upon a time, they act like he had a chat with Hitler. And because of this, it ends up costing him 70 million. I think that says a lot about how Swedish media works. Now people ask me, why are Swedes so cocked? Well, that's a good question, and I'm gonna be making a longer video about that in the future with a historical perspective. But just to sum it up here, it might be because we have a mainstream media that carries out witch hunts on people who have the wrong opinions. Sweden isn't exactly a climate of openness, and many Swedes know about this. So there is a market to exploit here if you just got the balls to do it. Kviberg didn't, and now his wallet is really sore.